I knew the air had shifted when the assistant's whisper hit my ear like a half-swallowed razor blade. "She called you dead weight," he murmured, eyes flicking nervously toward the new CEO's entourage. "Said you're a legacy liability." I didn't flinch, just sipped the burnt espresso some intern thought counted as hospitality and let it roll off like the thousand other insults I've had to swallow wearing heels in boardrooms built by men with half my spine. Cassandra Vale strutted to the mic like she was auditioning for a reality show called Corporate Guillotine. Her dress screamed power, her smile screamed marketing, and the camera crew? That was the tell. Only people desperate for legitimacy film their own coronation. "We're going lean," she purred, pacing like a predator. "Legacy roles will be reviewed, starting today." I'd heard it all before. Every buzzword, every smug rebranding mantra from every C-suite transplant who thought breaking things made them builders. But this one had the energy of someone who believed her own press release. She didn't recognize any of the names etched on the glass wall beside her. But I was on that list. Twice. Once for saving this company from acquisition, once for saving it from itself. Before we go further, can I ask one thing? If you're listening and this story already has you gripping your armrest, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it keeps this series alive and means more than you think. All right, back to the wolves. I stayed near the back of the lounge, arms crossed, watching her pace and pose. My badge felt heavy in my pocket. I'd worn it longer than most of the execs in the room had been out of college. My job title wasn't the kind you'd print on a glossy brochure, but I'd been the quiet constant behind every major strategic pivot for 15 years. I was the one they called when vendors panicked, when legal wanted blood, when the board wanted miracles by morning. Cassandra didn't even glance my way. She spoke in absolutes. "No sacred cows," she said, grinning at her own courage. "No tenure, no untouchables." The consultant behind her nodded like a bobblehead with a Harvard MBA. Another leaned over to whisper something in her ear, and she laughed. Loud, forced, like she wanted the whole room to know she wasn't intimidated. I've seen storms wear a softer face. What they never see coming is silence, not resignation, preparation. The way a chessboard shifts 3 moves before anyone realizes checkmate's inevitable. I walked out of the lounge that day without saying a word. Didn't need to, because every time someone like her comes in swinging, they forget one small thing. It's not the flashiest person who holds the power. It's the one with the paperwork. Before noon, I got the summons. Terse, no frills, the kind you don't ignore. The CEO would like a word. No name, no time offered. Just an implication. Now. I walked the long corridor lined with modern art no one understood but everyone pretended to admire, and stepped into Cassandra Vale's office, which already looked like it belonged in an influencer's apartment tour. Glass desk, chrome fixtures, a ring light. She was alone, but her confidence made it feel crowded. She didn't offer a seat, didn't make small talk. Just stood, arms folded behind that glass desk like she was delivering a TED Talk on how to ruin your first day. "I've reviewed your scope," she began, not bothering to look up from the folder in front of her. "There's nothing here that justifies your pay or access. We're terminating you, effective immediately." No HR rep, no documentation. Just a folder that didn't even have my name spelled correctly on the tab, and a security guy with a Bluetooth earpiece standing 10 feet behind me like this was a scene from a bad procedural drama. I stood there, watching her watch herself play executive. She wanted power to feel theatrical, but real power doesn't need applause. I reached slowly into my coat pocket, pulled out my badge, and placed it on her pristine desk. Her eyes flicked to it, confused by my calm. "I understand," I said. My voice was even, practiced, like reading a verdict. "But when the board asks why you fired the woman who owns 81% of this company, I hope you have a better answer than nothing justifies her pay." The look on her face cracked just a little. Just enough for me to know the truth had landed, like a splinter she couldn't reach. Then I turned and walked out, past the security guy who didn't move, didn't speak, probably questioning if he just witnessed a career suicide or something far worse. The elevator ride down was silent, just me and my reflection in the mirrored walls. I didn't check my phone, didn't call anyone. There was no rush. People like Cassandra think authority is loud, instant, and absolute. They think a title and a desk give them gravity, but you don't learn mass from a press release, and you don't learn who built the foundation until you start ripping out the walls and realize, too late, who held the beams together. The board wouldn't call her today. They'd let her hang herself with confidence first. And when the clause triggered, she'd learn exactly what was justified. The city outside my apartment window moved like a screensaver. Trains humming, horns in the distance, the low throb of industry grinding forward. I slipped off my blazer, set it neatly over the chair, and walked to the antique desk in the corner. Bottom left drawer. Locked. I still remembered the combination without hesitation. My father's birthday, the year I got my MBA, and the number of days it took to restructure the Montcrest acquisition after the CFO had a panic attack and hid in his Tesla. The folder was heavier than I remembered. Thick leather, brass corners, and embossed initials from a time when formality still meant something. I flipped it open, page by page, until I hit the gold mine. The full equity transfer protocol from the 2013 Montcrest Partners merger. Back then, the founder, Harold Delling, had split his controlling interest across a series of blind trusts to avoid antitrust attention. Most of the board thought the ownership had been scattered across institutional stakeholders. It hadn't. One of those trusts had been reassigned, quietly, to a holding company I incorporated under a different name with a different address, buried under layers of legal scaffolding that made it invisible to all but the most paranoid auditors. Caro Holdings, LLC, 81% voting control. Silent rights until activated under breach. I remember Delling's exact words when he handed me the final envelope. This is for when the company forgets who kept it alive. Use it wisely, use it quietly. I picked up the phone and called Norstrand Legal, the only team I trusted with documents that could reshape continents, let alone companies. Trigger Clause 11, I said. Notify the board. There was a pause on the line. Then Simon's voice came back, slower now. You're invoking majority governance? Yes, I said, walking to the kitchen, flicking on the kettle. Today. He didn't argue, didn't ask why, he knew. The clause had been buried under 5 appendices, designed to stay dormant unless a majority stakeholder was removed without board consensus. Cassandra had done just that. While she was too busy playing disruptor for the press, she'd tripped a wire she didn't even know existed. I sat at my kitchen table while the water boiled, opened a second folder marked Governance Triggers and Voting History. The last time we used it was 2016, to stop a hostile buyout. It worked without fanfare. No headlines, just signatures and silence. That was always the goal. Not rage, not revenge, just memory. Institutional memory, written into contracts, etched in clauses. Designed by those of us who knew how easily empires collapse under egos. She fired me to look powerful. She never stopped to wonder what I'd built while she was still writing thought pieces on LinkedIn about disrupting the hierarchy. Let her have her rebrand. I didn't need noise, I had paper, I had time, and now, authority. Day 2, and Cassandra was already out for blood. 3 directors, gone before the 10 a.m. espresso run. One of them had been with the company since the early 90s. Another had personally flown to Zurich to salvage our European logistics nightmare in 2017. Didn't matter. She dismissed them like expired coupons. Then she tore up 2 major vendor contracts, one of which had a buried exclusivity clause that'd take weeks of legal untangling. And just before noon, she announced a full-scale rebrand, complete with a new logo that looked like an app for meditation or pet cremation. I couldn't tell which. The press loved her. Decisive, unafraid, bold new vision, they tweeted, retweeted, and filtered. Meanwhile, in the real world, the general counsel's inbox lit up with a time-stamped notification from Norstrand Legal. The subject line was dry, the kind that doesn't scream until it lands. Request. Immediate review of shareholder structure, pursuant to Clause 11C. I didn't need to be in the building to know what happened next. The board group chat, yes, even billionaires use them, started pinging like a Vegas slot machine on meth. One of them, an old ally from the Montcrest side, forwarded me a screenshot. Just 6 words. Did she really fire you? I replied with a period. That's all. He'd know what it meant. Cassandra, oblivious to the legal detonation in motion, was hosting a press conference with all the polish of a tech launch. Legacy structures are being dismantled. She beamed, standing in front of a screen filled with buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing to anyone who had ever survived a quarterly audit. This is a new era. She even had a tagline: fresh vision, fast action. Cute. I watched her from the live stream on my tablet, cross-legged on my couch, a glass of white in hand, sun warming the apartment through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every confident sentence out of her mouth was another inch she was sawing off her own branch. I didn't flinch, didn't frown, didn't smile either. The real clock had started ticking when Simon at Norstrand hit send. Cassandra thought she was still in her honeymoon phase, but in governance law, time is a blade, and every hour that passed without a course correction was another page she couldn't rip back out of the company's record. She hadn't just violated a bylaw, she'd activated a clause that treated ignorance like fire, an emergency to be extinguished before the building went up. The irony? I'd written the language myself 8 years ago after a different CEO tried to gut the risk team without board oversight. That CEO retired for family reasons. I'd sent a fruit basket. Still got the thank you card somewhere. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was from a compliance officer I hadn't spoken to in months. What is Caro Holdings? I didn't reply. Let them search. Let them dig. Let the echoes reach her, one clause at a time. Thursday morning was supposed to be her victory lap. The strategic planning session had been teased all week. A closed-door reset meeting with hand-picked execs, buzzwords ready to be slung like grenades, and a deck crafted by consultants who build by the syllable. She'd even planned a LinkedIn post in advance. Building tomorrow. Grateful to lead such fearless innovation. I know because someone on her team scheduled it 2 hours early by accident. It went live before she even stepped into the boardroom. But when Cassandra walked in, striding like she was about to knight a new CMO, she stopped cold. 2 people were already seated at the table. Norstrand's managing partner, in his usual navy suit, was flipping through a thick binder with surgical calm. Next to him, the board secretary sat quietly, hands folded over a notepad that had already logged the room's attendees, time-stamped down to the second. "I need this room," Cassandra said, dropping her tote onto the table like a gavel. The partner didn't even look up. "You're here to observe." She blinked. "Excuse me?" This session was called under Clause 11C of the Governance Agreement, he said, still thumbing pages. Emergency majority session. She laughed, just a little too loud. By whose authority? He finally met her gaze and handed over the folder. Heavy, precise. My name, Eleanor Hart, appeared on every page, watermarked, notarized, and co-signed by a law firm that once got a sitting senator to resign without a hearing. Her hand stalled halfway through the first page. Her smile didn't fall so much as it hardened, calcified, the kind of grin you make when your stomach drops but the cameras are still rolling. "You're saying this is valid?" "No," he said. "We're not saying. We're confirming." The boardroom fell quiet. Cassandra stayed standing, flipping through legal language she didn't understand, stalling with questions she didn't know how to ask. Words like controlling interest, silent majority, and trigger conditions weren't in the executive onboarding packet. She had hired a PR firm, not a forensic governance analyst, and now the floor was shifting, just slightly. She could feel it. Every action she'd taken, every firing, every announcement, every smirk, was now under the shadow of a clause she'd never read. The irony was so rich I could taste it from my kitchen. I was buttering toast when the board secretary sent me a discreet update via secure channel. Session opened. Folder delivered. She didn't see it coming. Of course she didn't. She was too busy trying to prove she wasn't afraid of ghosts to realize some of us were the walls themselves. Not visible, but load-bearing. I didn't rush to headquarters. I didn't need to. The board had been awakened, not by drama, not by scandal, but by paperwork. The purest form of justice in corporate America. Cassandra had just walked into a meeting where she thought she'd lead the future. Instead, she was a guest in the past she didn't understand, and every page in that folder was a reminder that real power doesn't arrive. It waits. The walls didn't collapse. They receded. That's how it always starts. Quiet, Procedural, unrelenting, not with shouting or chaos, but with perfectly formatted documents sliding across polished wood and names read into record. Cassandra stood at the head of the table trying to hold posture. But posture means nothing when every eye in the room shifts from you to the paper in front of them. Inside that folder, the heartbeat of Caro Holdings, certificate of incorporation, proxy assignment documents, trust reallocation letters signed and sealed in 2013, plus the restatement of voting rights filed under Silent Governance Authority. The shell company she'd never heard of held 81% equity through layered proxies. The woman she'd dismissed like a ghost had been the controlling interest all along. The moment she fired me without a board vote, she tripped Clause 11C, emergency review for breach of fiduciary conduct. And governance protocol is a strange beast. It doesn't ask how you feel. It only checks whether the correct boxes were ticked. She hadn't ticked a single one. As the managing partner of Norstrand laid out the breach chronology, one of the younger analysts, fresh out of law school, sleeves rolled up like he'd just come from revolutionizing a spreadsheet, stammered. She didn't know. How could she? This wasn't in the orientation packet. The board chair didn't even look at him, just raised one hand. Ignorance doesn't nullify governance, he said flatly. It activates it. No one else spoke. Cassandra scanned the pages again, lips pressed tight. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain, maybe even apologize, but the format didn't allow for that. Governance law doesn't reward remorse. It only respects compliance. And she had violated the foundational assumption that the CEO understood who actually owned the ground she was standing on. Behind her, the logo she'd unveiled yesterday now felt like graffiti scrawled over someone else's title deed. All her bold declarations, her branding campaigns, her decisive cuts, they'd been made from a seat she didn't own. This wasn't a coup. It was correction. A recalibration of control buried not in bravado but in bylaws. The managing partner continued, flipping pages, detailing my status as silent proxy holder, the blind trust arrangements that backed the equity split, the clauses that required a board vote before any removal of an individual with classified stakeholder ties. The board chair asked if anyone disputed the legitimacy of the documentation. No one spoke. Cassandra finally broke the silence, voice small now. So what happens next? He didn't smile. The process happens. And that was it. No finger pointing, no shouting, just process. The very thing she tried to bulldoze, slow, thorough process, was now wrapping around her like a vice. She was discovering what happens when institutional memory wakes up, when the legal scaffolding designed by people who think 5 crises ahead begins to enforce itself. And at the center of that machinery was my signature. Not flashy, not loud, just final. She hadn't been fighting a person. She'd been fighting a system built to outlast people like her. The memo went out at 7:41 p.m. sharp. No flourish, no commentary, just the subject line that would split the air like a thunderclap in a cathedral. Clarification of controlling interests. 1 page. No attachments. No context required for those who'd been watching the chessboard shift. My name appeared in bold at the top. Cassandra's didn't appear at all. There were no words like reinstatement, because I hadn't been demoted. No phrases like oversight or administrative error, because what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a breach, and it had been answered not with vengeance, but with signature authority. Cassandra called twice that night. The first time, I let it ring. The second, I watched the screen light up, then fade. She didn't leave a message. She didn't need to. Some silences feel like locked doors you can't quite see behind. That morning, I dressed simply. No heels, no statement jewelry, just a black suit I'd worn once the day we signed the Montcrest merger when the founder leaned across the table and said, "You'll outlast all of them if you stay quiet long enough." At 8:03 a.m., I stepped into headquarters. No fanfare, no cameras, just the sound of polished shoes on stone tile. The front receptionist blinked once, then looked down, pretending she didn't recognize me. But the chair of the board was already waiting in the atrium, holding the elevator with one hand. He didn't say anything when he saw me, just nodded. A single motion that carried the full weight of institutional realignment. Then we stepped in together. On the way to the executive floor, no one spoke. The elevator dinged once and opened directly into the main lobby where Cassandra stood frozen, mid-conversation, mid-sentence, mid-delusion. She blinked like she couldn't quite process the sight of me walking through those doors with someone at her pay grade holding them open. "You can't just walk in," she snapped, voice high and hollow, like she needed the marble walls to agree with her. I held up my credentials, the new director-level badge they'd couriered over last night. It didn't just open doors, it assigned voting rights. "I'm not staff," I said, voice steady. "I'm governance." Every head in that lobby turned. Executives, assistants, the guy restocking the vending machine. Suddenly they weren't looking at Cassandra. They were looking at me, and she knew it. Her mouth opened, then closed again. There wasn't a response. Because there is no counter move for legitimacy, for authority earned and embedded in every foundational clause of the company she thought she owned by charisma alone. I didn't stop walking, didn't wait for a rebuttal. The chair and I entered the boardroom, where two new directors already stood to greet me. My chair, the one I'd never technically relinquished, was waiting. Polished. Ready. No welcome back. No performance, just the quiet thud of weight returning to where it belonged. For the first time in 48 hours, Cassandra didn't know where to stand. They convened without her. The boardroom felt different without Cassandra's perfume and posturing, without her consultants clacking away on MacBooks they didn't understand, without the artificial urgency that always follows people who confuse speed with intelligence. Just 12 people. 12 votes, and a resolution that had already been written before the door shut. There was no debate, just the chair clearing his throat and reading the motion. Immediate suspension of Cassandra Vale pending fiduciary review pursuant to Clause 11C and related governance stipulations. The vote passed unanimously. Even the ones who'd clapped at her first press briefing raised their hands without hesitation. By noon, legal had prepared the standard language, the apology letter, the neutral phrasing. The board regrets the oversight. Appropriate steps have been taken to ensure governance compliance. They sent it to me for approval. I didn't even open the attachment. I declined to comment, declined to participate, declined the quiet temptation to sign off with some clever turn of phrase. I had no interest in narrative, only structure, and one final adjustment. I walked into my office, mine again by default, though I had no intention of keeping it, and asked for one person. Lena Brooks, 32, sharp as obsidian, VP of Strategic Ops. The kind of mind you can trust with silence and know it'll come back stronger. I'd been mentoring her for 5 years. She'd never once asked for more than opportunity. Now I handed her the only thing that mattered. "I want you to serve as interim CEO," I said. Her eyes widened, but she didn't shrink, just swallowed, nodded once. "You'll be watching?" "I'll be around," I said, "but I trust you to decide what stays and what goes." The board approved the appointment in under an hour. Cassandra was informed shortly after. No drama, no outburst. Just a private meeting with HR, a quiet signature, and a silent walk to the exit with security trailing 3 paces behind. She didn't scream. She didn't plead, because by the time power shifts this completely, the resistance has already evaporated. The cameras missed it. There were no journalists waiting, no op-ed headlines to spin, just the sound of elevator doors closing for the last time on someone who thought noise could beat memory. I didn't attend her exit. I didn't need to. I sat by the window in a different wing, watching clouds roll over the city. A press release went out later that day, sterile and vague. Leadership transition, strategic review, commitment to stability. The markets didn't react. The staff barely blinked. And in that silence, perfect, unbroken silence, my legacy held. Not because I roared, but because the system I built didn't need to. Weeks passed. The storm didn't just settle, it evaporated. The company ran smoother than it had in years. No grand proclamations, no champagne summits, no memo chains clogged with euphemisms about synergy or agility. Just operations. Clean, steady, quiet, in the best way possible. Then came the report. It dropped on a Tuesday, the quarterly governance disclosure, required by statute. Often ignored. This one wasn't. Caro Holdings, my holding company, was no longer buried in fine print. It was named, publicly and plainly as the controlling stakeholder. For the first time in a decade, my ownership was visible by design, not just by clause. A whisper turned into a headline, and suddenly every exec who'd smiled through Cassandra's lean revolution was rereading documents they'd skimmed for years. I didn't say a word, didn't give a quote. Let the report speak for itself. Internally, HR rolled out a new training doc for executive onboarding. The first slide showed a single sentence in bold black font. Never forget the quiet ones with the real keys. I'm told someone in compliance smiled when they saw it. Probably one of the old-timers who remembered how close we came to collapse after the Montcrest merger, who remembered who pulled the firm out of the fire when everyone else was still busy assigning blame. Cassandra? I didn't hear much, but word eventually reached me that one of her prized consultants, the ones who had paraded through meetings with big promises and bigger invoices, had applied for a junior advisory role. Under Lena, my protege, the same woman Cassandra once called green but sweet in an internal Slack message she forgot I could still access. Funny how quickly perception reorients when power changes hands. I didn't reject the application. Didn't intervene. I didn't need to. That morning, I sat in my garden, warm cup of coffee in hand, watching the quarterly update flash across the screen of my tablet. Lena handled it flawlessly. Spoke with calm, gave metrics that mattered, thanked teams by name, never once indulged the fluff that had bloated the company's arteries for years. The board watched. Investors listened. I simply exhaled. The jasmine bloomed early this season. The air was still. No need to return to the office, no desire to correct the record. I had never left. They hired a new face for power. But they forgot who owned the walls.